Be aware of all the stages involved in turning a whole animal into meat and meat products ready for sale. So we'll quickly run through the different stages of a typical meat plant. The process falls into two parts. First, turning the live animal into a chilled carcass, and second, turning the chilled carcass into consumer-ready meat. We'll look at these two parts separately. The live animals are held in lairage for a short while. They are then stunned, hung from rails and bled. The carcass stays on the rails right the way through to the chiller. This makes it easy to work on, and it also means the meat never has to touch the floor. With cows, the hooves and hide are removed and sent off to different parts of the factory. With sheep, the fleece is removed and sent away. With pigs, the outer skin stays on the animal, but the hair has to be removed by putting the animal through a scald tank and singeing machine. The carcass moves on to the evisceration stage, where all the guts, stomach and intestines are taken out and sent off to be dealt with elsewhere. Notice how quickly they are taken away from the meat that is for human consumption. The carcass is inspected, graded and washed. Then it's passed into a chiller, where it's kept until it has a deep muscle temperature of less than 7 degrees centigrade. Now we start the second stage, where the carcass is turned into food that will end up on our dinner tables. The chilled carcass goes through various stages of primal breaking and secondary butchery. Notice how this stage is much more labour-intensive, how more attention is paid to fine details. The cutting rooms look much cleaner. There's less debris on the floors, more people wear gloves, and there's much greater emphasis put on keeping the product clean. The meat is finally turned into retail cuts. It's packed, sent through a metal detector, and taken via refrigerated transport to shops and butchers. And the very final stage is the most enjoyable of all.
Hygiene is vitally important if you want to make sure that the meat we sell is in the best possible condition.
We've already said that if meat's handled unhygienically, it can get contaminated. This results in food spoilage and food poisoning. But why does this happen? The answer is small, very small indeed, and there are millions of them. They are called microbes. Microbes are tiny living organisms. You can only see them under a microscope. And this is what they look like. They are everywhere, in the air, on the walls and floor, on machinery, and especially on people and animals. There are millions on you right now. There are even more inside you. But don't worry, your body has ways of coping with them to stop them harming you. But the food you are handling does not have any defense against these microbes, and that is where problems can start. Because you can only see these microbes with a microscope, we are going to represent them with cartoons. This is your average microbe. He lives on animals, on people, and in the environment, including clothes, equipment, and work surfaces. But if microbes are everywhere, why aren't we always ill? Well, it's a question of numbers. In small numbers, microbes aren't a problem. But when there are millions of them, they can be very dangerous. The more microbes that are on the meat, the more rapidly it will go off, and the more likely it will make someone ill. The real problem, though, is that even when there are millions of them, they are still invisible. Look at these two carcasses. One is covered in harmful microbes, the other isn't, but they look the same to us. So the important thing is to make sure that microbes never reach high numbers. To understand how to do this, let's look at some of the habits of microbes. They grow very quickly. They do this by splitting in two, again, and again, and again. In no time at all, you have millions of the creatures. In order to grow like this, they need 4 things: warmth, food, moisture, and time. The ideal temperature for the microbes is around body temperature, which is 37 degrees centigrade. They aren't too fussy about what they eat, and meat debris is ideal. They can find this all over the factory. There's also plenty of moisture in the factory. Water and blood are ideal for the microbes. Given all these good conditions, the number of microbes can double every 10 minutes. One microbe can turn into over 1 million in only 3 hours. So, if you want to stop microbes from multiplying to dangerous numbers, the only way to do it is to make life hard for them. Stop them from having warmth, food, and moisture, and don't give them time to multiply.
Good hygiene and operational practice throughout the manufacturing process is essential so that our customers will have confidence in our product.
We said earlier that the microbes that cause meat to spoil can be found on animals. But if this is the case, how is it that we can eat the meat from animals at all? Well, the main reason is that the harmful microorganisms only exist in certain parts of the animal. When the animal enters the slaughterhouse, its hide and feet may be covered in muck from the farmyard. This contains harmful microbes. The animal's guts, its stomach and intestines are also full of harmful bugs. Other parts of the animal may be harmful in other ways. For various reasons, the spinal cord and brain may not be suitable for human consumption. All these parts of the animal which are unfit for human consumption we shall call dirty. All the other parts of the animal are not examples of factory practice. It's fascinating to see how things end up, how cattle, pigs and sheep become beautiful displays on a butcher's counter and delicious meals on a plate. Turning meat from one thing to another is your job. The meat industry is massive and complex. It's hard and demanding work. It needs people with skill and concentration. And because the end product is eaten, it needs high standards of hygiene throughout the process. But when you walk into a meat processing plant, hygiene may not be the first thing to grab your attention. And because the meat is going to be cooked before eating, you may think that strict hygiene is unnecessary. After all, Cooking kills the bugs, so what's the problem? Well, problems do occur, and when they do, they can be very harmful. People have become seriously ill from eating meat that's been poorly handled. Some have even died. So what goes wrong for this to happen, and why doesn't cooking solve all the problems? One potential cause of illness or injury is when people find objects in the food they eat. This can be anything from bits of metal to broken glass, fragments of bone, bits of plastic, or even dead insects. Obviously, cooking the meat won't make these objects disappear. A hot piece of metal is just as harmful to swallow as a cold piece. Another thing that can happen is that the meat can get contaminated when it's being handled in the meat plant. The meat may then be stored for some time before being eaten. In that time, it may start to go off, and germs and poisons may build up in it. When the meat's finally cooked, it may look and taste perfectly normal, but cooking cannot kill all the germs or destroy the poisons, which can lead to serious illness. Another thing to bear in mind is that at home, some people don't handle or prepare food as safely as they could. They may not cook it properly, or they may even prefer to eat meat that's very rare. If this meat doesn't leave the factory clean, the customer runs the risk of getting food poisoning. So, cooking doesn't solve all your problems. It's still essential to work in a hygienic way.
And there's another reason to know about hygiene: the law. Legislation lays down very strict rules about how people who work in food factories should behave. If you don't follow these rules and the customer who eats meat you've helped to produce falls ill, then you or your company could be heavily fined.
You could lose your job, the plant could be closed down, and in the very worst cases, you could even be imprisoned for your negligence. It's a high price to pay for not following a few basic rules. It need never happen to you. If you follow this course seriously, you can make sure that the meat you produce gives enjoyment and satisfaction, rather than illness and complaint.
If you have bad hygiene in a factory, eventually everyone would lose their jobs. The factory would finish up by closing down because of lack of customers.
Because meat production involves specialized jobs, you may not